Alright, welcome back to the channel. As promised, I'm doing a Hero Frog matchup chart. So I did a little poll on my YouTube channel's community thing, and a lot of people were actually interested in seeing this video. So I decided, you know what, let me go ahead and get this out the way. I don't want it to be an empty promise. 189 people voted yes, so that was good enough for me. But yeah, let's just get right to it. So let's start off with probably one of the most represented decks in any given tournament. A deck that you're definitely going to play against a lot is Black Wings. And over the course of a year and a half of playing Edison format, or however long it's been since I started last year, I've come to realize that the Blackwing matchup, when it comes to frogs in general, I think is relatively 50-50. And the reason I feel that way is because the games where the deck doesn't draw Black Whirlwind, I feel like the frog deck wins if the Blackwing player doesn't see Whirlwind. But when the Blackwing player does see Whirlwind, I think that it's a curb stomp. It's not even close, really, especially if you can't get it off the field. It actually just trivializes the matchup so much. And that's pretty much how Blackwings treats any matchup where it draws Whirlwind. So that's not exclusive to Hero Frogs or Frogs in general. But yeah, every game that this deck draws Whirlwind, especially if they go first and go Whirlwind turn one, and you don't have immediately Heavy Storm or a Geki Break or a MST or something, you're probably just going to lose that matchup really quick. And then in general, and this is going to be something to say that applies across the board, the side deck cards against frogs are typically better than what frogs can put in against other decks. So games 2 and 3, the deck struggles a lot, but at the same time, frogs usually win game 1 against the whole meta. And that's kind of one of his strengths, is that game 1 is a lot of the time it's just free, but then you have to struggle games 2 and 3 against all the side deck cards, all the Pulling the Rugs, Vanity's Fiends, Fossil Dynas, Mask Restrict, TD Crow, Soul Release, like anything, right? Like all the side deck cards against the deck are really good. So yeah, in terms of Blackwings, I think that it's a pretty 50-50 matchup. I think that Frogs wins when the Blackwing deck doesn't draw Whirlwind, and I think Blackwings wins when it does draw Whirlwind. And of course, there's always outliers, so please don't take anything I say as an absolute statement, because Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a game of variance. So of course, even in games where the Blackwing deck doesn't draw Whirlwind, it obviously can still win. I'm not saying as though it's always this way, but I think that it's a relatively coin flippy matchup in general. Okay, Dragon Turbo. I will put it in Hero Frog's Nightmare. Like it is an absolutely terrible matchup, because if that deck does not brick, I do not think that you can win. And again, I don't think that's exclusive to the Hero Frog matchup, but I just think that Hero Frogs can't really pressure fast enough to make the deck really sweat. Granted, if you open up a hand that's like Stratos, Swap Frog, Miracle Fusion, you can go summon Stratos, search out Ocean, special summon Swap Frog, activate Swap Frog's effect, send a dupe frog or something to the grave, then play Miracle Fusion, and then attack with everything, and hopefully they just don't have Gores or Tragodia, and you can like kind of put them on a really fast clock. But that is a pretty godly hand, even though you do run 3 of all the cards I just named, but that is still a 3-card combo to do that much damage. I guess Stratos and Swap is fine, it's 2800, but like the more turns the Dragon Turbo deck gets, the worse it gets, and they don't really have to commit to the field, so it's just a bad time overall. I wouldn't exactly say Hero Frogs is one of the decks that like naturally 2-turn clocks people. Again, you can do it with Miracle Fusion, but you have to draw it and have the setup for it to really do a 2-turn clock. It's not a typical thing. So yeah, this is one of the worst matchups. Okay, so next is going to be Hero Beat, Diva Hero Beat, whatever you want to call it. I think that this is a matchup where Hero Frogs, it's a mostly winning matchup. I think that with the side deck Super Polymerization and Snowman Eaters, and then the main deck Dupe Frogs and Substitutes and stuff, just monsters with really big butts, it's hard for this deck to break through sometimes, and every turn that they don't and they can't do damage, it's just a winning game state for the Frog deck, because it wants to draw the game out long. And if it does, there's no way in the world a good Frog player is going to lose to a Hero Beat player if the game goes long. Gemini Spark and Hero Blast aren't really that good against Monarchs in general or Frogs. And the only thing that you really have to worry about in this matchup is like Miracle Fusion, but you also have your own Miracle Fusions, and they're probably just better than theirs. So yeah, I feel like this matchup, now that I've gotten a side deck to where it is, I feel like it's a winning matchup now. Like I don't think it's an absolute stomp. I'm still very afraid when I play against Diva, Hero Beat, and Hero Beat, but in general, I think that it is a mostly winning matchup. I would also say the same is true for Diva Hero. So I think that Diva Hero is another matchup where it's mostly winning for the Frog deck. I think that the Frog deck is a superior Miracle Fusion deck in general. Like, sure, it doesn't OTK you with it, but the control that this deck puts on the field when it plays that card and has like a dupe frog up or multiple dupe frogs up. It can be a lot because Absolute Zero comes out at a really high attack power, probably the highest that he's in any deck, and also Super Poly games 2 and 3. If you don't get OTK by Diva Hero, you'll probably just win over time from just monarching them and just out advantaging the deck. Like the Treeborn coming back every turn is a problem. It can be hard for them to deal damage to you in general, and then like Battle Fader, Tragodia, Gores, whatever you play for defense usually stops yourself from getting OTK, and then this is one of the best decks at reversaling your opponent with Econ and Brain Control and all that stuff. So yeah, they set up a field, and unfortunately when Diva Hero sets up a field, it typically commits a lot of its cards to that field. Like it's not a deck that explodes and then still has card advantage. It explodes and then that's all they have. So when you break their board, the game is typically over. So that's how I feel about this matchup. I think it's mostly winning. And I think any deck that plays water monsters and hero monsters, right? I think that those are all going to be mostly winning for hero frogs because, again, Super Poly is so outrageous in games 2 and 3, and they really can't side out cards to make Super Poly not good without, of course, ruining their own engine. So there's that. I would say Zombies is a mostly losing matchup. So you can beat Zombies, like the average zombie player, and there's a lot more average zombie players than there are of the top ones. But a good zombie player, man, it is rough. Like that matchup is very rough, especially if they're on that build that plays like double DD Crow, double Book of Life. It's just bad. If you don't draw multiple Caiuses that actually get to resolve, then this matchup becomes one of those ones where you're frantic that they're going to OTK you out of nowhere. And sure, you can have Battle Fader or whatever, but if it's too early and they make a big push like really early, like let's say you lose the die roll and they set Goblin Zombie, I don't believe in like attacking face down monsters typically, and I also don't want to accidentally attack into like a Pyramid Turtle with Stratos or something, and then they get the Goblin Zombie that way. So in general, like attacking face down monsters is not that good against this deck, and if you leave them out and they went first, and then it happens to be Goblin Zombie, and then they have a tuner, it just like gets really out of hand, and you have to be super on top of it in order to come back or win. They can pressure you a lot. They have a lot of powerful one-ofs that are good against you. Return from Different Dimension, Dark Armed, Mind Control, Brain Control, sometimes Burial. But yeah, the matchup is, I want to say it's mostly losing. It seems like a good counter to Hero Frogs. It's because of the natural removal that Zombies has in its deck. Like, most decks don't have built-in ways to deal with your graveyard and manipulate your graveyard. So that's just problematic in general. Okay, so let's say a matchup that I would say Hero Frog stomps, like, easily. I don't think that there's any competition against Six Samurai. Like it's just I don't really think that can do anything to really harm you or anything like that. I would say the same is true for a lot of these C tier or whatever decks. Like X Sabers is another deck I don't really feel threatened by when I play Hero Frogs or really any frog deck for that matter. Like unless they draw their God Hand, you know, Rescue Cat and Double Fall Troll or some crazy shit, I don't really think that you're at risk of losing at any point. On the contrary, though, and this one might surprise people, but I do think that Chain Burn is one of the worst nightmares for Hero Frogs because you cannot OTK that deck, especially because they're also playing like Wabakusa Threatening Roars or whatever, so you naturally can't OTK them. But then on top of that, everything that the Frog deck does starts chain links, and that is just a dream for Chain Burn, where you're always like, okay, I'm gonna summon Caius, chain link 1 Caius effect, target back row, and they're like, okay, chain link 2, chain link 3, chain link 4, chain link 5. So that's obnoxious. And I don't really know how much that matchup would improve for the Hero Frog deck after game 1, really, because we don't really side anything specifically for Chain Burn. I mean, not many people do, but like some decks can side Decree or have stuff like that. But at most, it's just going to be Dust Tornadoes and praying that they brick. And it's the same thing against Dragon Turbo, right? It's just like praying that they brick. And if they don't, I think you just lose. Okay, so another one that I feel like is a mostly losing matchup, and this might even be like a nightmare matchup, but I think that the Amaryllis Burn deck is a really, really hard match for Frogs and Hero Frogs because it's basically a Titanial Turbo deck, and she is ridiculously good against Frogs. Like, obviously, Monarchs don't work. They can this deck pressures you like crazy. 2200 attack monster that deals 800 when it dies, so it's basically a 3000 attack monster in that case if it attacks you directly. And then Titanial being 2800 and then playing 3 copies of that, and then having all these ways to recur Titanial into the field. Also, Titanial is rarely alone in this deck because they either have the Phoenician Cluster Amaryllis on the field or Dandelion tokens or some nonsense. So yeah, this matchup is mostly losing, I think, and it could even be a nightmare matchup, but I haven't tested it enough to really feel that strongly about it. But I don't think it's a good one, both conceptually and actually. And another matchup that I feel like is mostly losing would be Christia Sworn. I don't think that this is a good matchup for Frogs, of course. Like, Christia is one of the scariest things for the deck to face. So I'm going to say that the same is probably true for standard fairies, where it's like a very either close matchup or just a losing matchup, depending on how many Christias or if Christia is drawn at all, right? So I would say that Christia Sworn and fairies are like 50-50 if you don't see Christia every game. Like, if the fairy deck doesn't see Christia every game, then you're fine. But if they see Christia multiple times, they're playing 3 Christias like they should be, it's a pretty losing matchup. Like, they can crash into a Stratos or crash into your Monarch a couple times and then drop Christie main phase 2. And honestly, that is probably just enough. The matchup is awful. Also, just things like Flip Hamster, Get Ryko, Tribute Both for Christia is really good. So yeah, this is a monster that you do not want to see. It's essentially main deck Vanity's Fiend that recurs itself. And Vanity's Fiend is a card that everyone knows is good against Frogs. So a deck that, again, is main decking a version of that card, but better, is probably going to be a mostly losing matchup for you, assuming that they draw it. So I'm lumping Christia Sworn and Fairies like kind of in this mostly losing. The good thing is, one, both of those decks are underrepresented in the format. Like, most people just don't play them. And the people who do play them tend to not be all that great, especially when it comes to fairies. So like, you can get away with that matchup a lot of the times just because your opponent isn't that good. But I do not think that it is a good matchup. Machina Control, I think, is a winning matchup for us. So I want to say that every deck that like sets monsters like the Rekko Caius Hamster Engine, that's ones that are not value though, because value, we'll talk about that in a second. Value is different. But all of the like Hamster Rekko Caius decks, you pretty much beat them. They don't really do anything that's too crazy. Like, sure, they have Fortress, but then you have Miracle Fusion. They set monsters, you have Monarchs, and you just kind of out advantage them over time. I don't even size Cyber Dragon, and this matchup is still pretty free. And the same thing, like Cat, you know, it's another deck that like sets monsters. What I will say about Cat though, and this is interesting, I'm very terrified of X-Saber Arabellum. Nothing else in this deck actually scares me, but the fact that the Frog deck naturally plays in a way where it leaves its field open, especially around turn 1, there's a chance or an opportunity for them to really mess with your hand. And I hate that. If you don't have Battle Fader, you're just going to lose a card out of your hand often. And if you do have Battle Fader, they kind of can force it out of your hand, which is also annoying. Because if you already have Treeborn Frog set, you want to just be using your Treeborn Frog to be your tribute monster, or I should say your tribute material rather. So when you summon Battle Fader, because you have to, you know, defend your hand, it's kind of annoying. One, because the Battle Fader can't be used for something more important like not dying later on. But also now it's just sitting on the field, so you might as well tribute that, since Treeborn, you know, it's an awkward thing. It's like, if you have Treeborn, you tribute the Treeborn Frog, and then leave the Battle Fader, but then you're not converting the Battle Fader to anything. So it's just kind of like a weird minus, because they're just going to kill it with like any monster. But outside of specifically that scenario where your field is open and at around turn 1 point of the game, I think that this is a winning matchup for Frogs. Surprisingly, I would say that Gladiator Beast is actually like a 50-50 matchup. I think it really just comes down to, one, who won the die roll is huge. Because if you win a die roll against Glads, and like, let's say you open up one of your 3 Stratos, you have Stratos, you have Rhoda, you have Ecall, so you play 3 copies in Hero Frogs. If you open up Stratos, and you don't even know what they're playing, but you just like summon Stratos because that's just what you wanted to do, or just what you were going to do, he's a problem, right? Like, he is so much of a problem that in 2007, the Gladiator Beast decks that started to win were main decking a copy of Stratos because of how hard it was to deal with for Gladiator Beast. Like, they searched out Prisma, but it also was just the fact that it's 1800. So the same thing still applies in 2010, unfortunately, for the Gladiator Beast deck, where 1800 is too high. And so that's one thing. The other thing is like, just getting your Treeborn Frog in the graveyard and being able to maybe set a Regeki break or like have some kind of defense, have a Battle Fader before they can get down a Chariot is huge, because they can't banish that turn 1 Treeborn Frog, then they'll just probably get steamrolled. Cards like Econ and Soul Exchange really help with that whole thing. On the contrary, if Gladiator Beast goes first and they get set up, you know, any hand where like summon set 3 or 4 and they do have the Chariot and like they have follow up and all that, yeah, those games you're probably just going to lose. But I think that the matchup has got more 50-50 with the things that I've done, where like I play triple Regeki break and then I play like a main deck Soul Exchange. I think those things really help. Triple Battle Fader, I know people don't necessarily like Battle Fader, but I feel very strongly about Battle Fader. It's actually one of the reasons why I think that the matchup is as close as it is, because that card randomly, like, oftentimes they'll Jaizaris you and they'll pop your field and then they'll go to swing with it and then you just drop Battle Fader. And now that guy's just sitting there, and if he gets dealt with, that's probably just game. They put 2 cards into that. Nine times out of 10, whatever they were popping on your field wasn't actually like a card that you committed. You know, it might be a dupe block or it might just be like a monarch or something. So it's fine for you, but them not getting to actually resolve their attack is a big deal. So yeah, there's a lot. This matchup is very swingy. If you know how to play against Glabbies, it does help, but sometimes they could just trivialize the frog deck because Ready Ari is annoying as hell. Going first, setting too many back rows, all that stuff. Like, you know how it goes. Glabbeast is a cringe matchup for a lot of decks, but this is definitely one of their better matchups. But I do think that the way Hero Frogs is built and the fact that it plays 3 Stratos is annoying enough to make the matchup as close as it's ever been. All right, so some of these I can just kind of rapid fire off, like Ancient Gear, Gadrillatron, whatever the hell this is. Like this, I don't think that this is that real of a deck, any kind of Gear Town deck or whatever. And typically decks like that, once they blow their load, they run into a Battle Fader or Gores or whatever, they just kind of lose. So you playing a ton of those types of cards and frogs in general will just win those matchups for you. I want to say the same is kind of true about a deck like Fish. Like, it's just a deck that is going for OTKs and can't really do that if you have literally anything. So yeah, I'm going to say that there's not enough representation of the Fish deck to say that it has anywhere near a good matchup against an S tier deck like this one. Lightsworn, no, I feel like Lightsworn is a 50-50, and that's because you just don't know how volatile the Lightsworn deck is going to be in any given match. I feel like no deck has better than a 50-50 Lightsworn matchup, to be honest. Like, if they just mill too many wolves, you're just dead, right? Like, at the end of the day, every deck is at the mercy of what the Lightsworn deck decides to do that match. And yeah, so for that reason, I'm just going to put it at 50-50. I think if you wanted to build a Lightsworn deck to beat Monarchs, though, all you have to do is play more than one Arcus, because Arcus is obnoxious. Like, honestly, every time I play against this deck and they see Arcus, I'm always thankful that my opponent isn't aware of how ridiculous it is against frogs, because that card is just crazy. But yeah, outside of something like that, it is just really one of those matches where it could go either way. Like at Nationals round 1, I played against Lightsworn and he went Summon Lila pass after winning the die roll, and my hand was just insanely aggro, and because he was playing Lightsworn, I just went all in. So I went Summon Stratos, Search Ocean, Special Swap, pitch a guy, and like play Miracle Fusion, Absolute Zero attack Lila to check if he has Honest. He didn't have Honest, so he just took that damage, and he took more damage from Stratos and Swap Frog getting in. Next turn, he like, I think he either set a monster or summoned something else and passed again, and I was like, yeah, you're dead. Like, you can't afford to open up that slow. But that duel could have also just gone with him going charge, recharge, mill a couple wolves, and like, then we're talking about a completely different thing, right? So it could just go either way. I'm always nervous when I play against Lightsworn because, again, you just have no control over how they're going to behave. Against the Gemini deck, I want to say that this is a mostly winning matchup for Frogs. One, because of Frogs' consistency over this deck. Like, I get what this deck is trying to do, and I think that when it does accomplish that, which is the crazy-ass combos it does, it is very scary. But the side deck having Super Poly is randomly good against this deck for no reason. Like, if they ever have 2 Gemini monsters on the field, you can Super Poly for Super Alloy Beast Raptinus. And the scary part about that is, I believe Raptinus makes it where they can't Gemini Spark because their monster is actually now considered an effect monster or something like that. So Super Poly is already ridiculous to just take 2 Gemini monsters that your opponent controls and fuse them into this guy. But then also turning off Gemini Spark at the same time is wild. So yeah, I'm going to say this is a mostly winning matchup for Hero Frogs. The mirror match is obviously just 50-50. It can be skillful, but it can also be very terrible if one person draws their access to Treeborn Frog and the other person doesn't. Then you're just watching basically a non-game. Outside of that, though, it can be pretty skillful, but I think all mirror matches are kind of ass. Like, they're either 50-50 or just ass. So, yeah, sometimes it can be like, oh, you're a better player and therefore you won. But it could also just be like, well, I drew Whirlwind, or I drew a Treeborn Access, or I drew more Caiuses than you, or whatever the case may be. Norlaris, I will say that Frogs has a mostly winning matchup against Norlaris, just because if the Frog deck gets a turn to get Treeborn in the graveyard, it makes all of your top decks outrageous against Norlaris decks, right? So every Monarch, Miracle Fusion is obviously insane. And yeah, I think that a deck that wants to naturally send us into a top deck situation where Treeborn Frog is also part of the equation on the opponent side is like a really bad thing for the Nolaris deck. So I definitely give this matchup to Frogs. Gadgets, I have to imagine that Gadgets just get stomped by Frogs. Like, I'm sure that they can side a lot of cards against it and all that, Mask Restrict and Rugs and stuff, but like, you have so many problems with the Gadget deck. One being that you can't get through Dupe Frogs easily. So that's one thing. Like, that monster genuinely walls you out. Dupe Block is a god scenario for the Frog deck against them. And Absolute Zero is already problematic in itself because they play a lot of removal. and any removal will take away all the gadgets and that removal card, so you tend to go like plus there. Yeah, I just can't imagine that gadgets have a good matchup against this deck. Gravekeepers, how do I feel about Gravekeepers against Frogs? I feel like it's probably a mostly winning matchup, like outside of specifically Royal Tribute. I would imagine that this matchup is still in Frog's favor because of Caius's and Ryza's and all that stuff. I could see a world where like Miracle Fusion is in your hand though, and Necro Valley's up, and you can't play it, and that's really problematic. But the Monarchs are there for that. The Raigeki Bricks are there for that. So yeah, I'd imagine that this is a winning matchup. Also, Gravekeeper should suck in Edison format, so there's that. I think Vayu Turbo is a pretty 50-50 matchup. Game one is usually heavily Frog favored. They're playing Raikos and Hamsters in the main deck, and sometimes Dust Tornado. And that's like the best build of the deck that 10-foot plays. So most people just play that version. And yeah, that version is very good. Like I think it is the best version of the deck, at least by result anyway. And game one is typically free for the Frog deck. Like usually Frogs will run over Value Turbo game one, and then games 2 and 3 are just way harder for the Frog deck. And it can go either way. So yeah, I'm going to say this is a 50-50 matchup. I think that at the very least, though, Value does have the edge with the Royal Oppression, like it being the best Oppression deck in the format, and then Hero Frogs being really susceptible to Oppression is a good thing for the Value deck. And the deck has been performing really well lately, so I'm not surprised about that. But I do think that it has a really close matchup with Hero Frogs. I would say that like the anti-meta macro deck or whatever, I don't think it's a nightmare scenario, honestly, despite the fact that I get what the deck is trying to do with D-Fish or Macrocosmos. The problem is these decks are so fragile. Like we just featured it on the channel recently where I was playing the one that went like first in Swiss at some online tournament, and that deck at all points just felt like I could be one soul exchange away from losing the game. Like one soul exchange plus Monarch or one dupe lock is going to be too much. And then other stuff that you have to consider is like, oh, did the person draw MST or Unifrog? Do they have Heavy Storm when you don't have a Starlight Rose? Stuff like that is just really obnoxious. So it's mostly a losing matchup in the sense that they're playing 5 continuous floodgates that are designed to really mess you up. But then like games 2 and 3 with the Dust Tornadoes and stuff, they're just really good against a deck playing triple Starlight Road in general because Starlight Road doesn't do anything. And you could honestly just leave the floodgate up and then Dust Tornado something else and then go like Soul Exchange, Monarch, and they're probably just cooked from there. Like I said, the deck is very fragile, but it's not something that Frogs want to play, obviously. Quick Draw. So I want to say that this is actually surprisingly a 50-50 matchup. I think that like plant decks, anything that plays Titanial is annoying. And then the grindiness of Drill Warrior. Usually Drill Warrior is a terrible card because Blackwings and Vayu, they could play like Oppression and Dynas and stuff. And those cards really ruin Drill Warrior, but Frogs don't have any of those advantages really, especially game 1. And so a Drill Warrior is really, really obnoxious to deal with. Like I've had it happen to me way back and I was like, wow, that card's like when you Drill Warrior get back Dandelion every turn, it is so hard to deal with that as a Frog player unless you specifically have Dark Dust Spirit. Anything else, and you might just lose the game from that guy walling you out and just creating advantage every turn. So between Drill Warrior and then Titanial and then obviously Pot of Avarice just being able to regroup, it's really an annoying matchup that could go either way. I think DD Crow definitely helps in that matchup for obvious reasons. But yeah, it's very swingy. Like I've had games that are just like Titanial came out turn 1 and I just could not deal. And then I've had games where, you know, I just destroyed them because they're setting monsters. And I'm like, well, now you get Ryzed or now you get Caius and it's GG. Flamvo, I feel like Frogs mostly beat this deck. I don't think it's anything special. Like they have one opportunity to really beat over a guy that you normal summon, and that's Stratos. Like they could beat over Stratos with Fire Dog. But even then, synchros are just not good against Monarchs, right? Like that's just the thing about Edison format is that the Monarchs naturally beat every synchro except Turbo Warrior. Is that his name? Is that the 6-star one that like negates the effects or it like negates the effects of all monsters that are 6 stars and lower, I think. If they target it, something like that. So that guy specifically is good against Monarchs, but 1, no one is playing that card, right? And 2, every other synchro doesn't have protection against Monarchs. They all just kind of get destroyed by Caius and Ryza. And I say all of that to say Flamvel's main goal is to summon multiple level 8 synchros typically And that shit is ass against somebody just going econ, take one, attack over the other one, tribute for Caius, banish another thing. And it's just like, yeah, that just cleaned up everything I worked so hard for. So yeah, I can't imagine that this is a bad matchup for the Frog deck. And then Dragons. So when I say Dragons, we already covered Dragon Turbo earlier on, but Dragons, it's probably like a 50-50 matchup because of the fact that Frogs can't really pressure the deck too hard. Like I played against Fitz when he won the Deck Devastators 4 tournament. And despite the fact that I was like naked and playing in a situation that I'm not normally, I still feel like the deck is it has a decent enough matchup where I don't feel like it's favorite either way. Like I definitely think that it's very dependent on certain things like Future Fusion and Kwakimiro Drago stopping Gores and Battle Fader. Stuff like that is really swingy because at the same time it could just get monarched and absolute zeroed out the game because he does play like Rykos and Snowman Eater and stuff like that. Those really slow cards, like even Card Trooper susceptible to just getting econ or soul exchange, brain controlled, monarched away. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm leaning with the dragon decks that play traps. I do think that the dragon decks that play traps though is pretty underrepresented still in the meta, despite the fact that it did win the tournament this year. Like I still never really see it in tournament. And I'd be curious to know how many people even entered with the deck after Fitz won with it, because I thought it would become way more popular, but I didn't see anyone playing in that really at nationals. I think I actually did play against one, but if I'm being honest, that person did not know how to play not only Edison, but just like Yu-Gi-Oh! He sat down and was like, all right, I hope this is quick so I can go to lunch. And this was my round 2 opponent. He's playing basically Trap Dragons. And I just 2-0'd because he didn't know what he was doing. And as we were playing, I was like, I feel like I should be in a way worse position than I am. But he's just trying to rush to get to lunch, which means that he doesn't take this tournament very seriously. And so I can't really gauge the deck's actual ability by that opponent. But outside of him, I didn't see anyone else really playing that deck, like Trap Dragons or whatever. So I might move that around at a later date if I feel like it changed. But yeah, this is basically how I feel about Hero Frogs or just Frogs matchup spreads right now. Things could always change as new information comes out, as I test more matchups. But yeah, it looks like it just straight up destroys all of the fake decks, right? The whole top row is just kind of decks that aren't that real. I mean, Gadgets is the best out of all of them. But even that one, I would say that is not favorable for Gadgets to play against Frogs. Like, they don't want to play against Frogs. And then it has some pretty good matchups against some of the S tier decks like Hero Beat and Diva Hero. And then the other like A tier decks, Machina Control, Cat, Flamvel, stuff like that. Like the Gemini deck is probably like an A tier deck at least. And then it just goes like 50-50 with the Black Wings and Value, Light Sworn, because you know every deck is just basically like the same Mercy there. Glad I don't think is as bad as people make it out to be. I think that you just have to know what you're doing, know how to navigate that matchup, and it really is kind of die roll dependent, which is also just a 50-50 situation. So and then the decks that it absolutely loses to, in my opinion, are of course going to be like Christia. Decks that play Christia are just not ideal, because that can just, you could be winning and Christia just comes out and now you're absolutely losing and all they have is Christia and maybe a Herald of Orange Light with a guy in their hand, and that is too much for you to deal with ever. Zombies have natural anti-frog stuff in the main deck and just the OTK potential and stuff like that. A good zombie player is very scary. Then Titanial Turbo, aka Amaryllis Burn, that deck naturally just has a good matchup. And then Macrocosmos D-Fisher decks, they are made to beat decks like Frogs, so there's that. And then the decks that I absolutely never ever want to play in my life, Chainburn and Dragon Turbo. You are literally at the mercy of how they draw, and you can do your best. You can just play all your cards. If you're the Hero Frog player, you can play all of your cards because there's no reason to hold back, and you just have to pray. You just have to pray the god that they drew bad or they needed to hit something at a specific time, and if they don't, they lose. You need situations like that to occur. If they don't, then you probably just lose that matchup. So, all right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you think. Let me know how you feel about any of these decisions that I made for the matchup chart. This is how I feel, though. And of course, I just want to say again, every deck can technically beat every deck, but this is how most of the matches will go. If you played against one of these matches in 20 games, I feel like the average result is going to be what category I place it in. So like if I played against Blackwings 20 times and it was a competent Blackwing player, I probably will win 10 games and he'd win 10 games. That's how I feel about it. That's essentially what I'm saying about putting it in 50-50. And then mostly winning is like a 70-30, depending on what deck it is. It could be like a 65-35 or whatever. You know, you can debate about how much is mostly winning. But I'll say on average, like a 70-30, you know, the hero deck is going to win. And then stomps is obviously just those matchups are just not real. Mostly losing is the opposite, so it's just like a 30-70 matchup, one that you really don't want to see, and then the nightmares are what you'd expect. It's opposite of the stomping tier. If things go the way they're supposed to go, it's probably just like a 90-10 matchup. But all right, I'm gonna get out of here though. Yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.